Hey babes, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be a little hard for me. It's my next Storytime episode in my Storytime series, which is a very touchy subject for me because, disclaimer now, if this is triggering for you, definitely click off of this video. But it definitely includes domestic violence and mental illness, so if this is triggering for you, definitely click off this video. It's probably not a good one for you to be watching today. I was shaking while writing this, and I'm shaking this now in anticipation to tell my story, a part of my story that is. This is part of the hard part for me to talk about in regards to my story time. I am definitely watering down details so that it's not very detailed and not so descriptive, more generic, so it won't be as difficult to listen to. But for me, I can picture memories, and it's just a lot harder for me to talk about with all of the details that I know of, even though everything that you guys are getting will be somewhat watered down and more generic. Okay, so let's get right into today's video. This story time revolves around me being a teenage witch. It's an understatement to say that living with two mentally ill parents was rough. The domestic violence that began to unfold in my adolescence left me searching for coping mechanisms. I began to notice my body more, specifically noticing that I was a bit pudgier than I'd like. I was a little meaty for a kid. I wasn't big per se, but I was definitely, I guess, what you'd kind of consider slim thick. When I was younger, I definitely ate a lot of sugar, and my mother didn't really understand nutritional concepts, something that I ended up looking more into in my teenage years. But being younger and having to rely on my parents for food and nutrition, this was something that I didn't really have the best of, and so I definitely looked down on myself. My brother was also dieting around this time, and also we did poke fun at my dad for being fat or a little overweight. So it was something that was constantly going into my mind and me acknowledging dislike for fat. So I definitely started looking at my own body with lots of dislike. My eating disordered behavior didn't necessarily start off here, but it definitely took a root here, which definitely led to a full-blown eating disorder in my teenage years. But at this point in time, I wasn't looking into the eating disorder spectrum for an escape. I actually ended up finding myself drawn to magic. And so my escape of choice at this time in my life was everything fantasy, everything fictional. I read a lot of novels that revolved around the fae or fairies. I also had internet access at this time. My brother and I shared a computer which was located in his bedroom. We shared it, and it had dial-up internet connection that I used freely, unmonitored, so I was actually researching into Wicca and witchcraft. I quickly decided that it would be fun to devote myself to the craft and practice spell work. After all, the magical movies, Practical Magic, and The Craft had captivated my heart, and I believed, or wanted to believe, that there was more to life than constantly feeling the sadness of being unloved and unwanted. When I wasn't being yelled at or physically abused, hiding in closets and escaping into the bathroom, which was the only room in the house that had a lock. I was practicing solo spells, rituals, and researching correspondences, magical holidays, and everything there was to learn about Wicca and witchcraft. I did open up to friends at school about my involvement in Wicca and witchcraft, and I was definitely met with some friends that were fascinated and some friends that found me beyond strange and unusual. One of my friends actually wanted to roleplay as fairies with me, and it was a fun escape from the nightmares at home while I was at school. But of course, this did lead to some bullying from other classmates that thought I was and my other friend were completely strange and unusual. I was definitely misunderstood, and to be honest, I didn't have that psychoanalysis of myself at that stage in my life to understand why I was so fascinated in magic. It was an escape from my realities that awaited for me at home every single day after school. In 6th grade, for the friends that were interested and fascinated, I would read their auras. I would show them voodoo dolls that I'd crafted. Dolls that I'd crafted, honestly, because it was fun to create these things, and I was honestly quite proud of my work and how they turned out. But its core concept was voodoo dolls. My parents, when they found out, and well, my mother snooping in my room and discovering a voodoo doll, was not very pleased, was very concerned and not at all happy with the fact that she knew that I was practicing magic and these things. I kept a book of shadows, which for Wiccans is a magical journal of documented spellcraft or dream work. And I would find my mother in my room snooping around in my things, in my journals, reading my pages in my journals. So I did end up actually memorizing the Wiccan alphabet to prevent my mother from being able to read my journals. The domestic violence continued to get worse, but little did I know that it was not anywhere close to nearing its peak. After fights and yelling matches at home the night before, my mother would call my school. She would speak to guidance counselors and she would tell them to do something about me, essentially parenting me because she didn't know what to do with me. Yelling at me didn't seem to be working too well for her, but she didn't really seem to understand how to raise a child with care and love. I remember being pulled out of class one day and a guidance counselor had me in her room. She was speaking to me because my mother had called, and she wanted to tell me that if my grades were better, then maybe my mother would treat me with more respect and more care. At that time, my grades were not great. They weren't good at all. I was very unorganized. I wasn't on top of things. I wasn't exactly doing my homework all the time, and when I was actually doing the work that I was supposed to be doing, it was all just out of pressure to not get in trouble. I was very sheltered throughout my entire childhood, so I started to believe that everything that happened behind closed doors, all of the domestic violence, that it was something that was normal and every family experienced it. It wasn't until later that I fully started to understand that although that may be true to the extent that it happened and occurred within my household, in comparison to other kids at school my age, it definitely was a lot more intense and extreme than I had initially imagined. My best friend that I had made at the end of my 4th grade year was the first friend that I actually had over. She actually came over quite a bit. We were really, really close. It was the first friend that I could actually say was not just a friend in school, but a friend outside of school. Something that my mother definitely tried to keep me away from. And my mother definitely didn't like how often this girl was over. She knew that she was adopted, that she struggled with panic attacks, and by 7th grade, she was regularly smoking. My mother deemed her as a bad influence on me, but everything else aside, I started opening my eyes to the fact that what went on inside our household wasn't normal. And so I began to rebel. It seemed that my mother's mission was to keep me sheltered and closed off from the outside world. She did not like that I was hanging out with this friend so much. She noticed the impact it had on me, and well, my awareness was greatly growing. My mother ended up calling her mother one day, and she screamed and yelled at her on the phone, calling my best friend a druggie and saying that she wanted nothing to do with them, and she didn't want me or my friend to have any contact any longer. When my mother found out that we were going to be in the same class for 8th grade, she ended up calling my teacher and forcing her hand to separate us in class so that we couldn't be around each other. Our friendship definitely started drifting from this point forward, and we definitely were not as close. But unfortunately for my mother, the damage had been done because I definitely had a lot more insight at this point in time. I was starting to get so much awareness that everything that happened within the household was definitely not normal. that my parents were not good parents. I knew there was no life for me left at my so-called home. I was sick of the police showing up every month from all of the yelling and the noise complaints because of domestic violence that was occurring regularly in the household. I was sick of being physically abused and beaten by my father and my older brother. And I was sick of being emotionally abused by my mother. I was sick of the emotional abuse my mother caused each and every one of us every single day. So I decided this was not my home and these people were not my family. And so I knew I had to grow up quickly. I needed a way out, and I knew that the only way that I could survive on my own was to get a job and to have money. From this point, I made it my mission to get better grades in school because I knew that I was going to need better grades to get into a decent high school, and I knew that I needed to be successful in high school if I was going to make it and have a successful future. From this point forward, my whole goal was to obtain freedom. If any of you have seen the tattoo that I have on my back, which are angel wings, I used to be fascinated with wings throughout my childhood, either butterflies or angels or fairies. I loved wings, and I started noticing that I was jealous of birds flying in the sky when I was in the backyard trying to fantasize of a magical world and me being in it, just staring up at the sky, seeing these birds free. It was something that I was jealous of, and it was something that I craved. I craved freedom. I just wanted to be free from the chaos that surrounded me at home. I remember when I finally did get this tattoo, I didn't completely understand myself the significance of wings and why I was so obsessed with them. My friend had asked me what meaning it had to me, and that tattoos all had to have meanings. And I could only respond with, I think it looks cool. But to be honest, that was its significance for me, is the need and requirement of freedom. I had to make this video, this story time, this chapter watered down for my own sake. Even this was so hard for me to film. I'm still shaking right now, slightly. I'm trying not to, but it's really hard for me to talk about domestic violent upbringing that I had. This is not the worst of it. It is going to get worse. So if you're watching this and this is difficult for you to watch, maybe don't proceed watching my story times here, but I will eventually be making the next chapter in this series. And the next chapter should be a lot more lighthearted, as I am experiencing my first romantic relationship and transitioning into my 9th grade. Things are definitely slightly calmer around this time. So the next chapter should be easier, simpler, and then following that is when it peaks. So that is where I'm going to leave you babes off for today. I hope you enjoyed this story time, or at least found it interesting. I hope that with more chapters, my story starts coming together more, and viewers who have experienced similar stories themselves can find some understanding and peace that they're not the only ones who went through something that was difficult, and also to help them overcome the challenges in their lives that follow having a similar upbringing, because there are so many challenges that you don't even know that you're going to be enduring or having to deal with until you start getting older and into your adult life. So I'm not just telling my stories for funsies or for sympathy or anything like that. There's a point to all of this, the reason why I'm sharing my story, but I need to do it in bits because it is difficult for me. So this is chapter 3. So I'll be closing this chapter out here for today, and I hope to be seeing you babes not too long from now with the following chapter. Bye for now, till next time.